Hey everybody, it's Tim and Steve at Phantom History House here with the Phantom History Podcast. We're going live.
We are going live. How are you?
I am good, and this is going to be really interesting. We're talking about near-death experiences tonight.
We are, and we have an exceptional guest tonight who is an expert in this field and has written 3 books and edited 1 other on the subject.
It's going to be really interesting. So thank you everybody for watching Phantom History House Calls. All right, so before we bring Gregory in, we have had a lot going on this past week. The big finale of Phantom History House, and we had so much fun this weekend.
We did. We had 2 nights of ghost stories around the fire as we were closing our doors, but that doesn't mean we're disappearing. We do have a lot of great things up ahead. But thanks to everybody who came out for our final weekend to celebrate with us, and of course our final guest who spent the night with us. We had a really good time.
Yeah, we had 2 nights of ghost stories by the fire, and you did a great job, Steve. I have to tell you that, my baked goods, I will say, were pretty popular. They went over the Oreo cheesecake always gets good reviews, so I love making that. But thank you everybody who came, bought some items around the house. There's still some things for sale. If anybody wants to go to our website, there's a link on it right there that will take you to all this stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. And like I said, we are not done yet. They have a lot more ahead of us as we transition into this new reality for us. So make sure you stay tuned to phantomhistory.com and all the socials. We'll continue to keep you up to date about where we're going, what we're doing, and as podcasts release. And remember, as you're watching tonight, let us know where you're watching from and say hello in the comments. And you can also ask questions to our expert tonight.
Absolutely. So type those in the comments. Let us know where you're watching from right now. And we're kind of taking the show on the road, and I'm excited about this. You've been doing all these podcasts. Every time we talk to somebody, you're like, I would love to go there, see this place, visit it, see it in person, do interviews in person. So that's what we're going to do, everybody. We're going to be going as much as we can to see all these places, interview people in person. We'll be on the socials and on our YouTube channel especially, and we hope you'll follow along.
Yeah, my bucket list of places to visit is huge. I know we're only going to make a small indentation into it as we transition.
Well, we're going to do the best we can.
Yeah, I'm really excited. And we've met so many people from not only across the country, but around the world by doing the bed and breakfast. Now we get a chance to go kind of see them in their native habitat.
And if you're watching live, let us know what you think. We decided to try something different tonight. So we're in the dining room here with all of our gold Victorian mirrors. I think we kind of have a gold sheen going. I don't know if that's good or bad.
We do. This is the most tan I've looked in like decades.
As a ginger, yes, I would say that's probably true for you. But anyway, let us know what you think. We've just decided to try a different location tonight. And I think it's probably about time to bring Gregory in.
Yeah, absolutely. And before we bring him on, I just want to do a quick biography of him. Dr. Gregory Shushan, who's a Ph.D., is the leading authority on near-death experiences and afterlife beliefs across cultures throughout history. As I said, he has written several books. He's a researcher with the University of Oxford and University of Wales. He currently lives in San Francisco. So he is calling in from across the country to be with us right now.
Wow, such an interesting fellow. So accomplished, and you love history.
I love history.
And you love spooky stuff and spooky history too. So this is really interesting. I think we're going to love it.
I was excited to chat with him on Blue Sky and bring him on tonight.
So you ready to bring him in?
I'm ready.
All right, so here we go. Hi, Gregory. How are you?
Hi, Tim and Steve. How are you guys?
We
Wonderful.
are doing well and excited to have you here. And I just read a very small portion of your biography before I brought you on. But why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself to those watching and let us know a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Sure. Yeah, I sort of consider myself a historian of religions. I started out in first Eastern Mediterranean archaeology and then Egyptian archaeology, and then kind of defected into religious studies because I wanted to do this big cross-cultural kind of afterlife belief projects. And I also found myself looking more at the texts rather than the material culture, the tombs and the temples and potsherds and all that sort of thing. So it seemed more appropriate to kind of move into that other realm. So I did actually all of my academic work in the UK at University of London, University of Wales, and then Oxford. And now I'm actually affiliated with Birmingham Newman University, where I'm doing a new project on Greek and Roman near-death experiences.
Wow, this is really interesting. So where did you start your life? Where did you grow up when you were younger?
Actually in San Diego, California.
Very good. And then, wow, imagine studying at those prestigious places over in the UK. That's just amazing. How cool is that?
Yeah, impressive. And I know that you just released your newest book, which is called Near-Death Experience in Ancient Civilizations, The Origins of the World's Afterlife Beliefs. And what this and I haven't read the whole thing yet. I did get a sample copy, and I've been getting through it. There's a lot to it, which is fascinating. But if I understand correctly, you researched 5 different ancient civilizations and kind of compared their near-death experiences with each other, even though they have never cross-contaminated or had never communicated. Is that the right way to explain that?
Yeah. Yeah, for the most part, there was some interaction between, say, Egypt and Mesopotamia. They had trade links and things like that, but there wasn't like a major cultural integration or significant cultural influence. They didn't share religion or the same gods or the same myths or anything like that. So yeah, I wanted to look at these different civilizations at times when they were pretty much independent of each other culturally. There's no chance, for example, that Egyptian afterlife beliefs would have influenced Aztec or Mayan or Chinese or any others. So I just wanted to kind of um, rule out the idea that that happened before even in starting the comparison. And yeah.
And then obviously the similarities that you might find between them all are especially interesting when it's very clear that they did not connect and know and communicate.
Yeah, that's exactly it. So if they don't have that communication, then how can we explain this kind of series of similarities? Whether it's something that's psychological that all humans share, or some other, the kind of older anthropological arguments was like afterlife is because a belief in an afterlife is a tool of control from the elite, and that's why people have heaven and hell, or whatever kind of theory that people used to come up with. But what I found was that in all of these civilizations, there was a sort of set of 9 or 10 different elements that seemed to be superimposed on the afterlife beliefs pretty much everywhere. And all of those were familiar from the near-death experience. So things like leaving the body and then entering darkness, coming out into a realm of light, like an other world, meeting a being of light who is often identified with the deity of that particular culture, and then meeting deceased relatives, some kind of review or evaluation of their earthly life, and that's followed by a judgment and kind of determining how their actions are going to affect their afterlife state. Also seeing the body from the point of view of outside the body. So it's kind of the out-of-body experience symbolized in these different cultures, and various other things, a transcendence and kind of association with the God, this kind of idea that you've overcome your earthly limitations and you've become this kind of semi-divine or unified being with the divine.
So are you saying that all of those things you just listed were common to all of them?
Yes. Yeah.
That's remarkable.
Yeah. And I almost look at it as they were, imported as a set onto each one. So, but I should also, I don't want to overgeneralize too much because they were all very culturally distinct at the same time. They all had features that weren't shared with each other. So, for example, in ancient Egypt, there was this idea of traveling with the sun god through the celestial realm and then down into the undersky, as they called it, and then back again on this kind of eternal circuit with the sun god. That's not really a near-death experience theme, but still, those themes are present in all these beliefs. And I should also add, just to clarify, I was looking at the actual afterlife beliefs because at first I didn't think I would find any accounts of actual near-death experiences. But as I progressed, I found accounts in all of the civilizations except for Egypt. And I think the only reason it's missing in Egypt is because they just didn't use writing to talk about personal experiences, or there's no Dear Diary kind of thing from Egypt. It was really like official ritual or priestly texts, religious texts, bureaucratic texts, decrees by the king, and this sort of thing.
So you're saying in the Egyptian culture, they did not have that sort of telling your personal story, writing it down kind of thing?
Exactly, yeah. And if they did, it was in a very minimal way in afterlife themed texts, what they called confessions or negative confessions, where on their tombs they would say, I never killed somebody, I never stole from the poor, I never did this, I never did that, to kind of show the deities in the afterlife that they were a good person.
Well, I know in a lot of your research, Gregory, you talk about the religious aspect, and I'm curious. I know how I was raised, which is pretty conservative. It was either heaven or hell, and that was it. And talking about any other alternatives of afterlife was kind of frowned upon. Do you think some of these older religions and religions today kind of prevented people from sharing those experiences? Is that why it's hard to find?
No, I think religions today do that more, but I think it's definitely a kind of culturally determined scenario. How willing and how open people are to sharing the experience, and how willing people are to listen. I think in these ancient civilizations, I didn't come across any example where it seemed to be a taboo subject, or a thing that people weren't willing to talk about. But I did find examples in my one of my other books on near-death experience in indigenous religions, and that was looking at small-scale societies, what used to be called tribal societies, Native Americans, sub-Saharan African cultures, and the Pacific regions of Polynesia and Melanesia, and that sort of area. And what I found there was, in a lot of sub-Saharan African societies, the focus on the afterlife wasn't this idea of traveling to another world and coming back to the body and having these otherworldly experiences of heaven and unity with gods. Their idea was more that the ancestors, the spirits, still lived around the village. They kind of lived nearby in the forest. So the focus was on making sure they didn't cause mischief among the people in the community, or making sure that they did positive things. And so because of that, and also the idea that there were possession fears. So if somebody came back from the dead, then they wouldn't be seen as that exact person coming back to life. They would be seen as that person's body having been possessed by an evil spirit, or raised by a sorcerer in a way that's not even conscious, basically a zombie. And this could, inflict harm on the community. So that definitely prevented people from talking about near-death experiences. Or
No
even
kidding.
So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
there were cases where they'd be.
If everybody thinks that you are an evil spirit when you came,
Right?
why you would never mention it? Absolutely. So, were you saying that you said something about not creating mischief by the people that were nearby, the relatives, the spirits that were nearby? Were you saying that they weren't supposed to create mischief, or the living people weren't supposed to be creating mischief? I didn't understand that.
The spirits could be, malevolent types of spirits that are living in the community. So
I see.
Wreaking revenge on somebody that harmed them, or whatever. So it was this idea of gaining their favor, or at least preventing them from causing harm.
Okay, that makes sense to me.
Yeah, it does. And I know that, going back to kind of what you said about that list of 10 or so things that was very common across all of these cultures, whenever here we are, in TikTok, Instagram, and, Netflix days, every time you hear about a near-death experience, you see that light at the end of the tunnel, you see the family around you. I guess that's all influenced by these same kind of things that have been throughout history. Do you think that's kind of why we have that interpretation?
Yeah, for sure. So the way I look at it is, because I'm trying to constantly balance out the cultural diversity of these beliefs and experiences with the fact that they share all those 9 or 10 elements. And that's a pretty tricky thing to do, I think. How do we conceptualize how that even happened? Is it just like, because people's have the same physiology and their brains die in the same way and create these effects? Or could it be something else? And I think it's something else, just because, just to give a couple of examples, the idea of rushing through a tunnel is not really cross-culturally consistent. There's often entering darkness, but it's not described as a tunnel. And then in some societies, especially in like Polynesia and Melanesia, they talk about walking along a road during their afterlife, during their near-death experience. And they'll even say things like, I looked at the ground below and I could see footprints in the sand of the spirits who had gone to the other world before me. So it's the same thing as far as, transitioning from this life to the next in spirit form, outside the body, but they're not rushing through a tunnel. They're walking there. So if scientists want to argue that the near-death experience and going through a tunnel is the brain shutting down, and the lack of oxygen or whatever, narrowing your consciousness into this tunnel-like visionary experience, that doesn't seem to be happening in other cultures. So it kind of challenges some of the scientific materialist perspectives.
Absolutely. And remember, if you are watching, you have questions for Gregory, please drop those in the chat. We will be do our best to get to all of those. And I had another question and it just fell out of my head. Where did it go? But another one. I know a lot. You get asked this a lot. Why this subject? Why is it something that you wanted to dive into? I think it's it's the great unknown. What's the point of life? What's after death? But you've really gone deep. What motivates you?
Yeah, that's something I ask myself a lot, actually. I mean, partly it is just almost an academic question. Like this is a kind of unacknowledged phenomenon and stream in the history of religions that is, it's been kind of an undercurrent. This idea that near-death experiences have influenced culture and religion to such an extent. It kind of percolates up here and there since the 1850s. There'll be like an anthropologist or religious historian who will mention it, but then it's never kind of explored in any depth. So partly it was that challenge, and this, in this day and age, being able to find an original topic to pursue in an academic way is a rare thing. But then being able to find one that's just fundamentally as interesting as near-death experience, afterlife mythology, and also allowing me to do cross-cultural work. That's one of the reasons I kind of didn't pursue straight up Egyptology after I did my my first degree, because I thought, do I really want to be focused on that one particular civilization for the rest of my life? And I was like, no, I want to learn about India and China and all these other places. So that's part of it. But I think it's you can't study this kind of theme without it having a personal element and that curiosity of what actually is going to happen when I die. What does it all mean? And I still have no idea, but but it keeps me. It's part of what keeps me engaged anyway.
So I would think, first of all, I think this is super interesting, and it seems like the perfect academic thing because there's all this research and information you can gather and then compare, and the fact that it's all lining up is just incredibly fascinating to me. Like I think that's what's sort of mind-boggling about it. And I forgot my question now that I made that comment.
Well, I remember what question I was going to ask earlier. Part of what I remember reading and what I was able to get access to was and correct me if I'm wrong, of course, most of the near-death experiences are positive, and very rarely are they terrifying or scary or something that people don't want to relive. Is that right?
Yeah. Very small percentage of them are distressing. And even they don't have the same kind of cohesiveness and consistency as the more positive near-death experiences. They seem more like kind of hallucinatory. They're things like I was in confusion and I felt like there were evil spirits trying to drag me down in the darkness. They're kind of vague and they don't really have that kind of consistency. Occasionally there'll be an example where it's a regular kind of near-death experience, but the person their attitude towards it or the way they experienced it is a kind of negative interpretation. So rushing through darkness is terrifying, and the being of light is, frightening and judgmental, and they see different kinds of other worlds that are hellish rather than positive. So I almost tend to think of it as our consciousness is projecting our own personal and cultural symbols onto objective experiences, and we're kind of giving them form and meaning through our symbolic language.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense.
Yeah. Do you remember what your other question was?
Not yet. I don't know why. But Elaine has a really interesting question. So thanks everybody for watching. Please let us know where you're watching from, and please type in any questions. So Elaine asks, in your studies, have you found a difference in near-death experiences from a collectivist culture versus an individualistic culture?
That's a great question. Yeah. So a lot of times in the small-scale societies, which are more collectivist, there's a total lack of a life review. There's no personal judgment at all. And even in the afterlife beliefs, there's not an idea of personal judgment. And when anthropologists would ask these societies about that, they would say, well, it's not about me because it's an us. This is a community. So an individual's action isn't really that relevant when you're talking about the community level of things. And so when people meet a being of light or a spirit or relative in the other world and they're sent back to their body, it's not for something that's personal, for personal gain. It's not like you need to go finish your PhD, or you need to write your book, or fulfill something that's unleft, or even take care of your child. It's more about things that will benefit the community. It's like, go to this particular place and you will find where this particular plant grows, and that plant's going to help heal your people of this disease. Or you need to stop wasting your resources on funerary offerings because we don't need them in the other world.
Mhm.
Or stop wife beating. Stop these damaging practices that are not helping your culture to thrive.
Well, and to kind of piggyback on what you said about these funereal offerings, they don't help us on that side. Is there a thread anywhere in your research where people do have a near-death experience and then say, you know what, it's not what we thought it was, and what we were taught is it's not exactly correct? And I would think those people would have a difficult time sharing that, especially among their religious friends.
Yeah, that again depends on the culture. I think in, say, Native American cultures, there was a lot more openness to diversity of experience, because they were kind of, they had these visionary traditions that were kind of embedded into the culture. They actually made a distinction between near-death experience, dreams, and shamanic visions. And this was discovered by anthropologists like in the 19th century. Even though they didn't have a term for near-death experience, they were still able to describe, no, when somebody dies, leaves the body and comes back, that's different from dreaming. That's different from a cultivated vision that we achieve through ritual practices. Sorry, what was the question again? No, I've done it. It's contagious.
Well, do people come back and say, what we thought was on the other side is not exactly right? And is it a challenge for them to share that with their religion or religious friends?
Yeah. So I think in the Native American example, there was more openness to diversity of people coming back and saying, I saw this particular realm and this happened to me, and people would say, oh wow, okay, that's another piece of knowledge and possibility we can add to what we're amassing here, to our cultural wisdom, basically. But then I think maybe in some other cultures it was more of a challenge, but I can't really think of any examples where it was seen as such a challenge to establish religious belief that it was seen as a threat, except for in the sub-Saharan African examples I mentioned, or some also in Micronesia. Apparently, people would. It wasn't so much that what they were saying was conflicting with beliefs, but the fact of their return to life and not being a possessed zombie, that was then in itself was seen as threatening and as a challenge. Like they just wouldn't believe that was really the same person.
Wow, this is really interesting. And to my limited experience and knowledge, it's my impression that the indigenous, like Native American type cultures, were more open to diversity of all kinds in general. So it makes perfect sense that would have been the case in this instance.
Yeah, and there's actually a great example. Another way in which near-death experiences were kind of seen as benefits to the community was there were quite a few Native American accounts where they would meet the being of light or some other Kachina or Native American deity in the other world, and they would say, you need to go back and deal with the colonial forces in these ways. And so they would either say, you need to cooperate with the British and trade with them and basically make nice and kind of integrate their wisdom and their knowledge into your culture. Otherwise, the culture is going to die off. In other cases, they would say you need to fight against the British or the French or whoever, the Spanish, and you need to resist and not use their weapons, not use their technology, and basically retreat from any kind of dialogue with them. And at the same time, they would also say people who had near-death experiences would come back and talk to the missionaries and say, look, we don't believe in your version of an afterlife that you're teaching from the Bible, because we know somebody who was there just a few months ago and came back and told us what it's like. Mm-hmm. So your people might go through the experience that you're talking about. You might suffer eternal damnation, but we don't, because we know we've been there. So it was almost like a political force.
Right. Yeah, that's amazing. I love that. So I may already think I know the answer to this question, because am I correct that you said that you started by studying the Egyptian culture?
Right. Yeah.
Okay. So my question was going to be, of all these cultures you have now studied in this under this sort of subject matter, do you have one of them that you wish that you could like transport yourself to and live in that time and with that culture? I suspect it might be Egypt because you had such an interest in them, but I wondered if after all of this study, learning so much about all of these really interesting cultures who are successful on so many levels, if you might have a preference.
Yeah, I think it probably would be Egypt, actually. And I also know that I probably have a tendency to idealize all of them. but I think Egypt would be it, because it's I think out of all of them, it's probably still is the most I mean, we do know a lot about it, and I'm not saying it's unknown in the sense of like we don't know how the pyramids were built, or that ancient aliens might have been there, because all of that stuff is disprovable. But I think there's still so much about it that's not known, in the sense that we just can't get inside the mindset, and we can't get inside the thinking and creativity and symbol making that went into creating those texts and creating those beliefs and everything else. And to me, that's really fascinating. It's such an alien culture, not an extraterrestrial type, but
Sure. And is there a part of it that you romanticize and love, especially like, oh, I would love to have been a part of the culture because of this?
It's kind of the whole thing. It's the art, the ritual, the architecture, even the landscape. I mean, it's this incredibly green, fertile valley surrounded by, or flanked by these hostile deserts on each side, and it's just a really kind of dramatic, amazing place. And even in modern times, going to Egypt can kind of evoke some of that feeling, at least in the imagination.
Well, and the Egyptians were so fascinated with the afterlife anyway. That was, I mean, we all know about King Tut and all the stuff that was in the tomb, but there's also the idea of reincarnation. Kids are being born where they say, oh, I remember being somebody else.
Yeah.
How does that tie into all of this? Or is that a completely different subject matter and topic?
Yeah, I thought it was more completely different than it is. And so I'll just do another plug. So in this book, I talk a little bit about, there's a chapter on what are called intermission memories. And this is when children who remember past lives also remember the death of their previous life. So they will say, I remember I was, hit by a bus or a cart or whatever. And my soul left my body. I saw my body lying there. I went to another realm. I met a being of light. There was an evaluation of my life, and all these very near-death experience type descriptions. And then the being of light, instead of sending them back to their body, which would result in a near-death experience, will either send them to a new body, or kind of discuss with them, what kind of life they want to have, and then they would choose their new body. But in any case, they're at that point reborn into a new body. So to me, I was thinking, is that state of being, is that realm that's being described the same realm that near-death experiencers are talking about, but they're just being sent back to their old body instead of their new body. So I did a comparison of all the accounts that I could find cross-culturally, and there's some from Japan and Burma and Sri Lanka and India and various other places. And they really did correspond to near-death experiences, pretty much across the board, which was pretty amazing to me.
The fact that all these things line up is astounding to me. Like, it won't make you read the book. Honestly, everybody, you need to read this book because it's so interesting.
And I should say, like, even with, I keep mentioning the sub-Saharan African exceptions, it's not that they didn't have near-death experience, because I found, maybe a dozen. It's just they weren't integrated into the culture as much. So they're an exception to the idea of NDEs being the originating experience for an afterlife, but they're not an exception as far as near-death experiences actually happening.
And this is the book we're talking about, everyone. Near-Death Experiences in Ancient Civilizations, The Origins of the World's Afterlife Beliefs by Dr. Gregory Shushan?
Shushan, yeah.
Shushan. Yes. Yeah, very cool.
And, we, of course, the focus of this is all about, ancient civilizations. But I do remember a part of what I read in your book, you do mention a little bit about more modern takes on near-death experiences. And I think you said it's only been like 5 decades or so that it's been something that people have been doing. How much do you know about more modernized looks at near-death experiences, and how do those compare to what we're talking about?
Yeah, this is actually the 50th anniversary of the founding of near-death studies, formally in the West, with Raymond Moody's book Life After Life, published in 1975. So before that date, there was no such thing as the term near-death experience. Like that was just not a thing. Obviously, the experiences occurred in all these different cultures and around the world, but nobody had kind of isolated it as this thing that Moody did and mapped out the kinds of experiences that make up a near-death experience. There was, strangely enough, an account by a German theologian named Johann Christoph Hampe, Hampe, and he wrote a book called To Die Is Gain the same year as Moody, but it was only published in Germany at first. And he basically discovered NDEs and wrote about them at the same time. But he came at it from a kind of theological perspective. But in the West, because Moody was a psychologist and because the main kind of question on everybody's mind about these experiences is, are they real? Is this really a proof of an afterlife? It really kind of followed this scientific material, testing the materialist question kind of path and trying to figure out, first of all, if, what about these experiences are the same between individuals, and then are they all in the brain or are they evidence for an afterlife? But what was kind of lost in the rush to answer that question was an acknowledgement of the cultural diversity and things like walking along the path instead of speeding through a tunnel. So I'm hoping that in addition to kind of changing the narrative in the history of religions, that my work will also help change the narrative in near-death studies as well. Even though that's not my field, like I think it really impacts any kind of theorizing in that field that people are trying to do.
Yeah,
I like that.
Absolutely. And Kristen has a good question that I'm going to also add on to. Have you or anybody close to you have had a near-death experience? I mean, have you been close to that?
No, not at all. The only people I know that have had them is pretty much any time I give a talk in person or online or whatever, somebody comes up and says I had a near-death experience. So they're common in that way, but yeah, I don't have a family member or anything. Although my mom had an out-of-body experience a few weeks ago. She fell and hit her head on the tile in her kitchen, and she described how for just a second she was face to face with herself. She saw her own face and this look of fear and surprise as she was going down. And she said it was just as if her consciousness said, "This is going to hurt. I'm getting the hell out of here." and then next thing she knew, she woke up on the ground, on the floor of her kitchen. So,
wow. But I think it's interesting because, you always talk about whenever you do a ghost tour or we do a ghost event, a ghost story kind of event, that once everybody realizes they're sort of in a safe space around that, then they sort of start to tell, well, when I was a young boy, we had this experience in our home, and they tend to tell their own stories. So I think that they feel safe to share. So I feel like, is that perhaps, do you know if these people that will tell you their experiences after you've had a talk, have they felt comfortable? Do you have any sense if they felt comfortable to share this before?
sometimes, but there are quite a few who will say, I never wanted to talk about this before. And there's also a real need among people who have these experiences to share them and talk about them, and also to be believed and validated. I just got an email the other day by somebody saying, I've written to various scholars and scientists about my experience, and no one will believe me. What can I say? What can I do to get them to believe me? And I kind of feel like I had to say, I don't think they're going to believe you. Instead, I would talk to people who are more likely to believe you. Go to the International Association for Near-Death Studies and join their survivor groups and their sharing groups, and talk to more sympathetic ears rather than trying to change the minds of people who don't want their minds changed.
That's really smart. Did everybody hear that? That was such a great point.
Yeah,
It's the same thing.
I think so many people are trying, regardless of what it is, to convince people of something, which can be exhausting. But when you find the people who want to listen or are intrigued or maybe have that same experience, it makes the conversation so much easier.
Right. He's describing trying to get validation in the wrong place.
Right.
Yeah. And I feel like sometimes you want to get validation from the place that I don't know, like from your church or from some places that feel like you should go there,
Yeah.
But then my experience, certainly with the ghost stuff that we've been talking about and paranormal experiences, like there are a lot of people that can help you and will believe you and that you can have those conversations with, but you have to find them. And Gregory, you probably wouldn't be surprised to know that we have had people come here to our bed and breakfast with our paranormal theme, specifically because they wanted to be able to share. You sat in the library with one fellow who was like, I've never been able to tell anybody these things that happened to me as a child in our house. And we felt like that was we were very proud of being able to give people that sort of experience in safe space. So I feel like you're also offering something of great value to people in that way.
Oh, thanks. I mean, there are other people who are doing it in a more direct way, like Peter Fenwick, who recently died, unfortunately. He is a British neuropsychiatrist and research scientist who did a lot of work on NDEs, but he co-wrote with Sue Brain, Brayne, like a handbook for doctors, nurses, hospice workers, any kind of clinician, to basically educate people in that profession about near-death experiences and to tell people that like these are not pathological things. These people aren't crazy when they talk about them. These happen, and here's what you need to know about them. Not so much saying that these are real experiences and they're true, but just that, listen to your patients and support them if they want to talk about them, and don't make them feel like they're crazy.
That's the key. Don't make people feel like they're crazy. And I'm curious for you, Gregory, since you've been doing this for a while, you've been researching, how has this impacted your own personal views about near-death experiences and the afterlife? Is there truly something after this, in your opinion? Where do you land on all of that?
I really don't know. I always think of this title of a medieval book of Christian mysticism called The Cloud of Unknowing. And I feel like I dwell in that cloud of unknowing, like partly because from an academic scholarly perspective, I don't want to take a stance either way, because I think once I do, my work would suffer. I think it would, the perspective people would have on it would also kind of be a little more suspect. I mean, it's already suspect enough, but so I think if I came out as some kind of believer, then automatically like your credibility kind of disappears.
I think that's true.
Yeah, and then at the same time, I genuinely don't know. So I feel like I wasn't raised in any particular religion, so I almost don't even understand the concept of belief. I feel like I know things or I don't know things. Mm-hmm. So I feel like I'll find out soon enough.
Well, that's one guarantee. We will all find out eventually.
Well, but I would think that it would give some level of comfort, regardless of all of those things. Just to know that there seems to be. I mean, for me, I think there's some level of comfort, no matter if I don't know what's going to happen. Like people seem to always be okay.
Yeah.
Regardless of what it might be or what it's going to look like or whatever. But like that does give me some comfort.
Yeah, exactly. People come back and they often say, why did I have to come back? It was great over there. So things like that, even if it is just an illusion, or if we survive our death for 5 minutes and then die, or whatever happens, it still seems like it's going to be a pretty amazing exit or transition.
Yeah, absolutely. I like that.
Yeah, I do too. And again, haven't had a chance to read the whole book yet, but I love how you take such a close look at all these different cultures. You also look at modern times. And I know there's one, this was early on in the book, of course, you talk about how people have witnessed themselves being resuscitated, mm-hmm. And then they come back and share the story about what they witnessed, which all that just fascinates me to no end. And there's so much that I want to know, but also the joy is not knowing.
Yeah.
To keep asking questions.
Yeah. But then, the parallels in history and cross-culturally always kind of bring up that subject too, because why are people throughout history reporting seeing their own body from a perspective outside it? Mm-hmm. And, just like they do in the modern accounts. So.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I just think it's like, I guess you sort of alluded to this a little earlier, but like, well, what is it I want to spend a lot of time studying and writing about and researching? And like, I think you fell into something really very cool and really interesting. Like, I mean, how could you run out of interesting ways to study this topic? I think it's very cool.
Millennia of data to research and compare. It's amazing.
Yeah, all these different, and then the fact that they all line up is just super cool to me.
Yeah, that's the thing. There's always a different culture to look at. And if not a different culture, there's always a different dimension to look at. Like I mentioned, with the indigenous religions book. At that point, I was sure that every culture I looked at was going to kind of conform to this idea of near-death experiences influencing the afterlife beliefs of the culture. So when I came to the African case, I probably did more research than any other particular civilization, because I was really trying to figure out, why is this not conforming? But it just ended up being a really interesting challenge, and to try to figure out, explain why it wasn't conforming, but not with reference to like, oh, this is a failed theory, or it doesn't work, but just trying to looking at it from within from the perspective of the cultures, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. Which I think is what gives such validity to your work, is that you are looking at it in the context of the different cultures. And then when they line up and seeing the diversity, that all makes it very powerful.
Yeah. And I love what Kristen just said. They definitely do not discuss this fascinating field on career day. So that is exactly true. Go ahead.
So if someone's listening or seeing this later and they're really interested in this, what's the best way that they can find your work and these books?
They should be available on pretty much wherever you buy books, on all of the online booksellers. Your local booksellers can also find them. The new ones with Inner Traditions, which is a big publisher, and I'm also on Patreon if you want to get free books by becoming a patron. And I'm also on pretty much all the social media under my full name, Gregory Shushan. Website under that name too.
So you can keep up with all the stuff you're doing and find out more about it. I love it.
Yeah, I do too. And we could ask you questions for another hour and a half, but we're not going to do that to you. Because I know that you are doing a lot of interviews promoting the new book. So we really appreciate you taking the time to chat with us and tell us about your expertise and all your research.
Oh, thanks. I appreciate you guys having me on.
Yeah, and thank you everybody for watching and asking your questions. And please, if you're watching this and you thought this was interesting, make sure to share it with someone so they can see it as well. And Gregory, thank you so much for talking with us. This was really, really interesting.
Yeah, thank you guys. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely.
Thanks, everybody.
See you next time, everybody. Bye-bye.